Mr. Fernandes of Falmouth.
Like many before me at this rostrum, I'll begin with a quote from President Kennedy. During his speech at the America's Cup, Kennedy noted that it is an interesting biological fact
that all of us have in our veins the exact same percentage of salt in our blood that exists in the ocean. And therefore, we have salt in our blood, in our sweat, in our tears. We are tied to the ocean. And when we go back to the sea, whether it is to sail or to watch it, we are going back from whence we came.
Inspiring stuff. Also completely factually inaccurate. You don't have to be a scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution to know that it's definitely not a biological fact that the salinity in our veins is the same as that of the ocean. But as a Cape and Islander, I cannot help but agree with the former president that we are all tied to the ocean, and the legislation before us today strengthens that bond. But how did we get here? Through the leadership of this speaker and many members of this House, this body passed nation-leading offshore wind legislation in 2016. And now Vineyard Wind will become the nation's first utility-scale offshore wind project, bringing good-paying, year-round jobs to the islands, to the South Coast, and across the state. This first-in-the-nation 800-megawatt project is expected to reduce carbon emissions by more than 1.6 million tons per year, enough emission reduction equivalent to taking 325,000 cars off the roads annually. And after this House took bold action on offshore wind, states across the country followed suit. Now, if every state hits its goal, 57,000 megawatts of offshore wind will be produced, enough to power 28 million homes a year in this country. That is true leadership by this body that will make a global impact in the fight against climate change. But while we were the first, we've fallen behind. Other states up and down the East Coast have taken proactive steps to capture economic benefits of offshore wind, including manufacturing and development opportunities. And the cooling of the industry here was evidenced when only 2 companies were part of the last solicitation process. The bill before us today recognizes this and takes solid action to solidify the Commonwealth's position as the nation leader in the offshore wind industry. This legislation will spur massive economic development and local jobs and infrastructure with new incentives, and by establishing an offshore wind industry and investment trust fund with dedicated revenue stream to support research, development, manufacturing, and innovation across the state. And for the first time, this bill unlocks the potential of offshore wind to cities and towns and private companies across the state by allowing them to directly get their energy from offshore wind. So now from Berkshire County to Nantucket County, municipalities that have pledged to take climate action will have the ability to power their communities with clean energy from Massachusetts wind, harnessed by turbines put up by Massachusetts workers. It also builds a school to prosperity pipeline for our children to take advantage of these local jobs through an offshore wind credentialing program in high schools. Now, as many of us might know, Massachusetts was once the world leader in energy. Whale oil ships from Massachusetts, whale oil from Massachusetts ships was used to light homes across the country. And in their whaling heyday, Nantucket and New Bedford were the wealthiest communities in the world. A cursory look at world history shows that the places that control energy production generate massive economic prosperity for their people. With this bill, we are taking control of our energy future and the economic benefits that will come from it, and we're doing it responsibly. This bill helps ensure that wind turbines peacefully coexist with the environment by including provisions protecting marine life, including specific components to protect the North Atlantic right whale. And this legislation gives priority to contracts that include fair labor agreements and those that include benefits for low-income ratepayers and environmental justice communities. It requires that wind companies have comprehensive environmental and fisheries mitigation plans, and it creates working groups to give the fisheries industry a seat at the table with real oversight power over mitigation funding. And most importantly, this bill puts us at the vanguard in the fight against climate change. Just this week, the United Nations issued a warning that the impacts of global warming, the floods, fires, famine, the displacement of millions of people and species of wildlife is happening at a far faster pace than anyone anticipated. That same report noted that the warming waters, due to climate inaction, have driven 78% of the lobster catch from southern New England to colder temperatures. The bill before us today is about making a commitment to future generations to harness the wind, to drive out the dirty fuels that are making our state and our people sicker, poorer, and more vulnerable. It's a critical step forward in creating a livable planet for future generations. And we are all tied to the ocean, and when we go back to the sea, we go back to where we came. And it's time for Massachusetts to return to the sea, to reclaim our energy dominance, and we must return to the sea to save our planet from the destruction and devastation of climate change. And I ask that you join me in supporting this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.